The following is a production of the Pritzker Military Library.
How necessary is America's space program? What role does it play in the war on terror? Should man or woman go back to the moon? Answers from former astronaut James Lovell, next on Front and Center.
From Chicago, Illinois, this is Front and Center with John Callaway. Our special guest, Captain James A. Lovell, United States Navy, retired. And now, from the McHenry Atrium of the Pritzker Military Library, your host, John Callaway.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you and good evening. How necessary is America's space program? What relationship does it have to America's technology leadership? What, if any, role does our space program play in national security? How does today's space program differ from the pioneering days of landing men on the moon? Who better to answer those and other questions about our space program than the one and only Captain James Lovell, one of America's most respected and beloved astronauts? More about Jim Lovell in a minute, but first a few words about our format. The first hour of our program is recorded for broadcast. I'll interview Captain Lovell, and then we'll take questions from our audience here at the Pritzker Military Library in downtown Chicago. At the end of the hour, we will say our formal broadcast farewells, but then we'll continue with questions for Captain Lovell on our worldwide live webcast, which comes to you from pritzkermilitarylibrary.org. Now, Captain James Lovell was chosen in 1962 for the space program following extensive service as a naval aviator and test pilot. He executed various commands in the Gemini flights, including the history-making Gemini 7 flight, which saw the first rendezvous of two manned spacecrafts in 1965, and the Gemini 12 mission that perfected astronaut extravehicular operations. Captain Lovell became the command module pilot and navigator on the epic six-day journey on Apollo 8, man's maiden voyage to the moon, where he and fellow crewmen were the first humans to leave the Earth's gravitational influence. And he was the backup commander to Neil Armstrong for the Apollo 11 lunar landing. Captain Lovell's fourth and final flight was on the incredibly dangerous Apollo 13 mission in 1970. And some of you may have seen a little movie about that adventure. Would you please give a warm welcome to Captain James Lovell. Welcome.
Thank you, John, for that very, very nice introduction.
Thank you. Welcome. Let me just say that for those of you who haven't seen the Adler exhibition at the Adler Planetarium, one of the things that's great about the James Lovell exhibition there is that you get to see these artifacts of when you were a kid. You must be a good saver because you see these little letters that were written and things like that.
I'm a pack rat.
And we're grateful. All historians are grateful for that. But let me, before we get to the big space issues, just a little bit on your background. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was actually born in Cleveland, Ohio. I only spent my first year there until my family moved back and forth. We were in Philadelphia. And then I spent my real childhood through grade school, high school, and 2 years at the university in Wisconsin. I went to in Milwaukee through grade school and high school, and then to Madison for 2 years at the University of Wisconsin before I finally got into the Navy and went into the Naval Academy.
And tell me about your mom and dad. Tell me about your dad.
Well, unfortunately, my father died when I was 40, or when he was 40, and I was just a youngster.
How old were you? 10, 12?
Yep, just about 12. Just about 12 when he died. And so my mother really supported me. She was a secretary in Milwaukee, worked for my uncle, and we lived in a little one-room apartment, as a matter of fact, for the longest time through high school. And then I went to the university, and of course, I was very fortunate because I couldn't afford to go to college. I tried for the Naval Academy when I was a junior in high school. I didn't make it. I was third holder in it. And, but the Navy had come around just after World War II, 1946, about a plan called the Callaway program. because more naval aviators were leaving the service after World War II than they anticipated. So they suddenly needed naval aviators. And this was a great program. They sent me to college for 2 years in an engineering course, and then down to Pensacola for flight training. And then the idea was, after flight training, to go out to sea as an aviation midshipman. And then after 6 months of that, they would promote you to ensign, send you back to college for the last 2 years, and you were a regular naval officer with a college education. Really fine. During my 2 years at the university, I applied again for the Naval Academy only because of my mother's insistence. And I thought, well, and when I got the results, I was first alternate. I said, that's the end of the Naval Academy. I'll never make it. And then I went down for flight training. During pre-flight, which is before you do the flight training, I got orders from the Navy Department. If you still want to go to the Naval Academy, you know, here's your orders to go to the Naval Academy. Well, while I was there, young Marine officers were training me, and they said, why do you want to go to the Naval Academy? You already have 2 years of education. You're already in flying, which is something you really want to do. And, you know, you'll be 2 years behind these other people. But the old commanding officer down there at pre-flight pulled me aside, and he said, Lovell, Midshipman Lovell, do you really want to go to the Naval Academy? Or do you really want to make the Navy your career? And I said, yes. He said, well, then get to the Naval Academy, get your education while you can, and then we'll go from there. So I went to the Naval Academy. Meanwhile, my contemporaries in the Callaway program got their wings, went to sea as aviation midshipmen. What happened? The Korean War started in 1950. They were the first midshipmen in combat since the Revolution. And they did a wonderful job. Meanwhile, I went through, finally in 52, graduated from the academy, went back to flight training, and that's how I started.
That's very interesting, but you will forgive me. I don't think we really know. I'm very interested in what propelled you, you'll pardon the pun, to the greatness. And I don't think we really understand that unless we understand your mother and dad and where you come from. Tell us, I don't know anything about your father except he passed away when you were young. Who was he, what was he about, and what was your relationship to him as a young man?
My mother and I were actually together when I was a youngster. Then they separated. Okay. My father came from Canada, and I saw him. In fact, he was a Canadian citizen, never became an American. Yeah. Married my mother here in Chicago. My mother is from Chicago. Oh. And so when they separated, then he died when we were separated, and we had lived in Terre Haute, Indiana at the time. But the real mentor of the reason why I wanted to follow, my uncle, my mother's brother, was an early naval aviator. He graduated from the academy in 1913, was the 58th Naval Aviator, and occasionally he'd come to visit us. And he'd tell us the stories about flying off the old Langley with biplanes and all this. And that got me the inspiration that, you know, naval aviation would be a nice career.
But somebody once said that if they had a scientific way of measuring it, we would discover that your interest in rocketry began in the womb. I mean, tell us about, because you were into that very early on. Were you not, sir?
I was. I had sort of two goals, and I was really tied, torn between them. Somehow, in early high school, why I don't know, I started to be very much interested in, first of all, astronomy, because I was a Boy Scout and I was learning about stars, but I was learning and also about rocketry. I think I read a book that Robert Goddard, who was the father of American rocketry, started his experiments in 1926. And I was so interested in that I started to read all about it. And then in high school, a friend of mine and I said, well, let's build a rocket. Well, I was reading about these liquid fuel rockets that Goddard was trying to do, and actually we were starting to learn about von Braun and what the Germans were doing with the middle of the war. They had captured one, I guess, someplace, and we were getting to learn a little bit about that.
World War II for you youngsters.
This World War II.
Middle of the 40s.
Yeah, middle of the 40s. And so Joe Sinclair and myself went out and decided to look about building a liquid fuel rocket. Well, it soon became very, noticeable that we couldn't do that. I mean, it was impossible.
But therein lies a great story, right?
That's right. But we could do a solid rocket. And so we started to look about how we could build a solid rocket. And one of the ingredients we found out would be sulfur, potassium nitrate, and charcoal. Now we had to get that somehow. And so I had an aunt and uncle here in Chicago. And one time I came down to visit them, and I looked in the telephone directory, and there was a chemical company. So I said, I will go down into this chemical company and see if I can buy a pound of charcoal and potassium nitrate and, sulfur. And so the chemical company was on Michigan Avenue. And I got down to Michigan Avenue, and even in the 1940s, it was quite an impressive place for me. And I walked by, I looked at the address, and I went into this building. It had these big, metal doors, these big bronze doors, walked up and got into this particular area. And I walked in, there was a nice office with a receptionist, and I said, I'd like to buy some chemicals. And she looked at me and she said, what for? And I said, well, we're building a rocket. and well, she didn't know really what to do, so she said, just a minute. So I was ushered into where a salesman was, and he was behind a nice desk there too, and there was no sign of rocket or chemicals anyplace. And he said, what do you want? And I said, I like to have a little sulfur, potassium nitrate, and charcoal. And he says, we don't sell it by the pound here. We sell it by the railroad car load. And he says, do you know what those chemicals mean when you mix them together? And I said, rocket fuel? He said, no, gunpowder. And he says, son, he better go back and redesign this thing. So I went back to my chemistry teacher, who was sort of the inspiration for starting this, and he said, well, yes, I do all that. He said, if you mix them in the proper proportions, though, they will burn, and they will not explode. And so that's what we did. We mixed them very carefully, got a mailing tube for the base of the rocket, and made a little nozzle on it, and put a stick at the long end, thinking that would be the guidance system. And one day out at it was a Saturday out in a big field, we went out there and propped this thing up and lit it. And we all ran like heck after that. And it went up about 80 feet and then blew up. So our first attempt was not too successful, but that gave me sort of the inspiration. I wanted to become a rocket engineer. Actually, I wrote to the American Rocket Society, and that's when he wrote back and said, study mechanics and thermodynamics and then go to either MIT or Caltech. Well, at that time, as I said, I couldn't afford it, and that's when the Navy came through.
But it's a good story because it reminds us that you don't succeed the first time you do something. You didn't succeed the first time that you wanted to become an astronaut, did you?
No.
Little medical test there.
That's right. I was very fortunate at the time when NASA was formed in '58, and then they decided to put a man in space. So they went through the criteria of the people who they thought would be required, just military, because President Eisenhower said, just pick military test pilots. They have security clearances at that time. And so the Navy and the Air Force went through their personnel records, and about 110 of us had the criteria, what they're looking for in education, in engineering, jet pilot training, test pilot school, graduate of, not less than 35 years of age and not higher than 6 feet. And so 110 of us were assigned to go to Washington, D.C. from various parts of the country that we came from. And I can recall quite vividly, they picked 40 at a time, and we were in the first 40, and about 3 or 4 people. I was at the test center at Patuxent River testing airplanes at that time. And I went up there, and they talked about putting a capsule on top of a Atlas ICBM, which they were now developing down in Florida. And of course, if you look at the TV at that time, they were blowing up every other day. And we thought, boy, this is kind of dangerous. But all of us really wanted to go, especially me, because I was interested in rockets to begin with. And suddenly, these two careers that I was looking at were suddenly converging and coming together. So out of the 110, they picked 32 people for continuing testing. I was one of the 32. And I went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to the hospital there, which they had an aerospace medical facility, and that's where we did our testing, still all kind of secret. And I was the only guy out of 32 people who flunked the physical. I couldn't believe it.
And just a tiny little technical thing, right?
Yeah, excess bilirubin in my blood is what they told me. And so I was very much dejected, came back. They didn't tell the Navy, though, about these tests, and so I went to a flight surgeon, a good friend of mine, and I said, here's the results of this test. What's it mean? He said, I don't know. He said, I'll put you in the dispensary for a couple of days, and we'll go through some tests. And they did, and then every 6 months he checked me out, and he says, you know, it's just like having an extra finger or something like that. There's nothing wrong with you. The Navy thinks you're great. And so when NASA wanted to have a second selection for Gemini, I got a call from the Navy. They said, would you want to try again? And I said, why not? And I did. That time I passed and I got in.
If you could summarize, I mean, your whole career with the Gemini and Apollo programs is so massive. But if you could summarize what you think you achieved as an astronaut, give us I guess what the professors would call a thesis statement, and then maybe we can come back and put a little meat on the bones.
Well, I think I was very fortunate in the space program. I think I got into it at a very progressive time, a time when things were still new, a time that we are still doing research and development. I missed Mercury, of course, but in the second group, I got into actually 4 very, very significant missions. The first one, Gemini 7, a 2-week mission designed to go 2 weeks because that was the maximum length of time that we are now designing and programming to go to the moon. So we had to find out if somebody could live in 0 gravity for 2 weeks before we sent anybody to the moon that it was forced to be in 2 weeks. And there were many doctors at that time, the medical field, said that no, 2 weeks in 0 gravity with a body that, and in fact a species that had, evolved under the influence of gravity, it would be a complete change for that, and things wouldn't function as they would in gravity. But we had people that were there for 3 hours, 4 days, 8 days. Well, let's try 2 weeks. And so we did. We went up there. We found out there were no body functions that did not work in that did not work in 0 gravity that worked here on gravity. In other words, everything worked. You could breathe. You could swallow. The only thing we noticed in that particular case was the fact that tears formed in the eyes because those little eye ducts would tend to get the fluid down through the ducts. They would just stay there, and of course tears are salty, and pretty soon your eyes would start to tear up again. And it would you had to keep wiping your eyes until you got kind of used to it. We did notice, though, that the muscles deteriorated very fast.
How fast?
Well, after 2 weeks, when I got back on the aircraft carrier, I actually, for the first couple hours, had to actually say left leg, right leg, to go, because they had not done anything for 2 weeks. And it's amazing how on Earth that we continually strengthen our leg muscles by just walking the rest of our body around.
But how would you come out of some of those? I mean, we see these pictures down at the Adler. We see these pictures of you and your colleagues up there and of eye waving and everything. I would think that you would just buckle to your knees when you returned and that you wouldn't be able to walk for a few days.
Well, 2 weeks is not enough. It has to be a lot longer than that before you really, you get incapacitated with muscle deterioration. But for the longer flights, of course, we learned that you have to keep exercising these muscles because not only do they deteriorate, but they also do not allow, when you stand up, the leg muscles make the blood vessels contract so that blood doesn't flow all the way down from your head into your legs, and then you'd pass out. And that's another reason for these leg muscles, because they're very necessary to keep the blood from flowing down to the bottom part of your body under Earth's gravity.
How did you deal with itching?
Well, on Gemini 7, for the first couple days, we had this, we called it a get-me-down spacesuit, all completely covered. And we were able to take off the head, the mask itself. I mean, the helmet was all one piece. It was kind of cloth, and we got that off. But we couldn't get off anything else. And we were wired up for EKGs and all sorts of stuff, and EEGs on our head. And pretty soon, we said, and we called the control center. And we said, you know, the spacecraft appears to be in good shape. It's not leaking. Why don't we take off these suits? Now, that had never been done before. Take off the spacesuits because they were afraid that if there was a leak in the spacecraft that had to get down, these suits would protect you. Well, 3 or 4 days went by, and we weren't getting the results for our request. Now, the suit had a large zipper in the back. And so I started to maneuver the zipper back down again, all the way down, and kept bringing it down more and more.
Always the rebel, weren't you?
Rebel, and pretty soon I was inching my rear end out of the back of the suit, and it was going forward like this. And Borman was really, he was, all by the book. And he kept saying, can we get out of these suits? Can we get out of these suits? And I wasn't saying anything. And pretty soon, I took it over my shoulders and dropped it down on my lap. And pretty soon I put the legs out, and there I was out there in space in my underwear.
And how was it?
It was great. It was great because the suits tend to make everything real dry. And yet the perspiration then started to come up, and the humidity started to come up and made it feel a lot better. Poor Borman was still in that suit. And finally, after about 5 days, Mission Control said, how's Jim doing? And he looked over at me, he said, he's doing great, he's out of his suit. And he said, well, get out of your suit. And so we spent the last of the 2 weeks in our underwear going around, very
and that worked, and that can work.
Oh, it worked. And now if you look at shuttle flight, if you look at the video and things, they've got shorts and T-shirts and things like that, and that's what they use.
But you took it upon yourself to launch, shall we say, an interesting initiative. You did it again on Apollo 13. Apollo 13's in trouble. Now you're trying to get rid of everything that you can, every single thing that you can get rid of to make it lighter, et cetera, because you don't have that much fuel to get back. And you decided, without asking mommy or daddy or the principal or the teacher for permission, you decided to take those. They have that telemetry that measures your heart, your blood, all of that stuff, and you removed it, didn't you, sir?
Yeah, I removed all the bioelectric material from my body because I didn't want them to know how scared I was.
That's right.
And I took it all off, and of course down there in the control center, suddenly they saw my heart rate go 0, Yeah. And they thought, uh-oh, Lovell's had it, and no, I just took it all off, and pretty soon my 2 companions did the same thing.
How scared were you?
Well, I was a little apprehensive when the explosion occurred. Of course, this was my 4th flight, so up until that time, I was very comfortable. I mean, I was getting very used to space flight, the sights and the sounds and the stars, and even the smells were so familiar to me. But when the explosion occurred, and then we knew the significance of it when I saw the oxygen escaping from the rear end of my spacecraft, I thought that our chances were very, very slim. But the one thing that we didn't do, we didn't panic, because if we had panicked and we bounced off the walls, 10 minutes later, we'd still be in the same spot. Because we at first thought that a meteor had hit the lunar module. And so our first action was trying to close the hatch between the two so that we would not lose all the atmosphere in both vehicles because the tunnel was open at that time. And pretty soon, we couldn't get the hatch closed. That was a strange thing. Jack Swiker tried to close the hatch, and he couldn't get it. So
an oxygen tank had exploded.
That oxygen tank had exploded, and then suddenly I tried it. I couldn't do it, and pretty soon we realized that had not occurred. A meteor had not hit us, and we still had some time left, and that's when we started to think what we had to work with, and what do we do to get home.
Captain Lovell, I've always gotten the notion that however cautious NASA is, there is a sense of adventure among some of you, that you don't always go by the book. Or if you see a little problem before launch, well, we'll do the thing over here, and then we'll do the thing over there, and then we'll be okay. Is it true now, with the investigation completed and upon reflection over these many years, that you all did see something relating to an oxygen tank that you knew about prior to that flight, but thought, no, we can tweak this and we'll do that?
Well, the thing that we saw, and of course the whole story about the explosion is quite extensive, but when we were testing the spacecraft about 2 weeks before we were to launch, it was called a countdown demonstration test. It was all out on the launch pad. The spacecraft, of course, was on the booster. Everybody in the control center, mission control, or actually launch control, was there to do what their job was. The crew was in the spacecraft. And what we do over a period of time is to count down from the time the crew gets in the spacecraft all the way down to launch, to 0. And of course, we don't launch. The big booster doesn't have any fuel in it, but everything else is fueled up. And we've had oxygen in our tanks in the spacecraft. We've had hydrogen in those tanks. And so we see that all that is working because we fire up the spacecraft to make sure that everything is working. The oxygen is feeding to pressurize the spacecraft, to feed oxygen into our suits, to breathe, and we used oxygen to produce electricity in our fuel cells. All that was working. And when the countdown demonstration test was over, down to 0, everything worked fine. And so the ground crew went back to remove the oxygen. And when they went to put gaseous oxygen in to force out the liquid oxygen, these are big liquid oxygen tanks, they found out that the gas going in was the gas going out, the liquid remained the same. And that's where we had to make a decision, because they went back to the history of this particular tank that they had problems with, and they saw that it was dropped at the factory. And then they went, of course, like all good engineers, looked at the schematics, you know, the diagrams of this big tank, and found out that if it had been dropped to the factory, and of course it was refurbished after it was dropped, but the one thing they didn't test was removing oxygen after a test, and they saw that there was a tube that could have been loosened by this drop. And that's what was giving the symptoms that they are seeing now. And so then they all started to philosophize, including myself. We can remove this tank and replace it with another tank. It'll take at least a month to do this, to go through all these tests again and everything. Well, that tank has a heater system in it, used to, when we turn on the heater, to boil off a little of the oxygen, to keep the pressure up, to feed oxygen to all the systems. Well, why don't we turn on the heater system and just boil this oxygen out? Because the tank and the system was working for everything it had to do in space. It's just that we could remove the oxygen on the ground. So that's what we did.
That's what I mean by ad-libbing it, kind of.
Yeah, we ad-libbed it, and what we didn't know was that there was a short in that heater system, and we turned on the heater system. It started to do what it was supposed to. The oxygen started to go down, but that little thermostat at the top, which protected it from getting it overheated, opened up, but the power at the Cape was higher than the voltage we used to fly with. And when that happened, the two contacts were welded shut, and therefore we never had a protective system. The temperature in the tank got up to about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, we know now from tests. No one ever caught it. And the day we were to launch, we reloaded the tank with oxygen, and it was a bomb ready to go off.
Houston, we have a problem.
Went off at 200,000 miles out.
Who said that, Houston, we have a problem?
That's an interesting story. The first person who said that was Jack Swigert. He said, hey, Houston, we have a problem here. Now, they were changing shifts down at the control center. And Jack Lausma, who was the capsule communicator, said, say again, please. And then I said, Houston, we have a problem here. We have a main B bus undervolt. That's the way it was.
So it's a shared Bartlett's quotation.
Shared, yeah. And now Houston, we have a problem is in the public domain. Everybody uses it.
We do indeed. My wife's from Houston, and sometimes we use that expression. What's it like up there when you've got your tasks done and you can have a moment to look out either at the moon or back at the Earth and reflect?
Well, on our Earth orbital flights, Gemini 7 and Gemini 12, it was, really nice. Gemini 7, we had a lot of time just to look out. And we never tired of seeing the Earth as it really is. In Earth orbits, you can see continents very nicely, oceans, islands, and of course, and you can even see, to some degree, some man-made objects, runways of big airfields. Cooper claimed that he saw the Great Wall of China. I've always doubted that. But you can see also, and we had, of course, sunrise and sunset every 40-some minutes. So we went into sunrise, and then we had sunset, and you can see the airglow layer. It's about 2 degrees above the horizon, and of course, we were underneath the Van Allen belts, but above the atmosphere, of course. But it was a very beautiful sight. You could see the lights during nighttime of large cities. They lit up very nicely for us. And of course, going to the moon was an entirely different experience. Being the first flight to go to the moon and seeing the far side, which we never see from the Earth, of course, see the ancient old craters. It was quite impressive. But the real thing that impressed us most was seeing the Earth as it really is. I wish everybody could go out there and see what they have back here. We came around the moon, and we were, of course, looking at all these craters for the very first time. But suddenly we looked out, and over the horizon, as we came around from the far side to the near side, the Earth came up, Earthrise. And it's quite a sight. You can see the blues of the ocean, obviously the whites of the cloud patterns. You can see the land areas. You can see the browns, the tans, the pinks, the salmon colors. You don't see green. Green is absorbed by the Earth's atmosphere as it comes up. It's sort of a blue haze. And of course, as I've often said it many times, when you philosophize about what you see continents, but you don't see cities. You don't see people. You can't differentiate between, whites or blacks or Christians or Jews or Muslims or French or Greeks. The place looks completely uninhabited. And yet, there's about 5 billion astronauts, all striving for the same things on that spaceship Earth. Very, very impressive sight.
It's interesting. We talk about you being in the heyday of the space program. But one of the things that came through in this book, Lost Moon, is that your wife, Marilyn, had to go over, along with other spouses, to the mission control to see certain things, because by the time one of those flights, by the time Apollo 13, the networks, well, we've seen that, done that, they wouldn't broadcast it. And now people would say, now we really, we follow something like the Columbia tragedy. But it's like, oh, we've got to deal with AIDS in Africa, we've got the Middle East, we have the Iraq War, we have cities we need to rebuild. Nice job, Jim, great, wonderful moment for America, but we don't really need a space program, do we? What would you say to them?
Well, a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people felt that way when the first Mercury flights went up. Yes. That why are we spending the money on Mercury, and on the space program, and we still have, various, diseases and maybe other wars were going on and things like that. The program is unique in certain ways. It is the one area where we can either battle each other, as we did in the Cold War with the Soviet Union about putting things in space, Sputnik, and then they put in the Yuri Gagarin, and we were behind. But it was a race that only generated new technologies, and there was good competition. Then after the Apollo program and after the Soviet Union, became Russia again, and we started to cooperate, we found out that the two of the areas of the space program that really enhances everybody, we can work together. We can learn more about other countries working together on a common project. which, is so necessary these days. And you can see the cooperation we now have with Russia, and there's about 15 countries that are working on the International Space Station. Then in the early days, if you recall, John, and I recall too, because I was just a naval aviator and not in the program. Remember Sputnik in 1957?
Absolutely.
I remember seeing that spent rocket go back, as we looked out. And I said, how did these Russians put a satellite up in space? Didn't we have all those Germans there in White Sands putting up rockets, and why are they so far ahead of us? That was a great spur, that Sputnik. One of the best things they did for us was a spur to education. That caused more people to think about education and science and engineering and just about everything else. And it really gave a great push toward getting our young children educated, which is still going on today.
But could you list 4 or 5 things, or maybe there are thousands of things, that are for those who are pragmatic? And you could say, well, in the field of health, we're able to apply this and this. In the field of this, we're able to geology. Etc. Are there practical applications from all these billions spent on space and all these lives dedicated to space, and some of which were lost, that we can point to for those pragmatists in the audience?
Yeah, you're talking about spinoffs. I'll mention one very significant spinoff that started in the very beginning. To get to the moon, to get our space program going, we needed computer technology. And the size of our boosters were such that we could not put the same mass up that the Russians could. They built a bigger booster because when they developed their atomic weapons, they were much bigger than the ones that we had. So when we developed, we built boosters to fit the particular warheads that we had. So when we went into the space program, using those military boosters now for peaceful purposes, we had to develop electronic components. We had to miniaturize electronic components, and we had to develop computer systems to work with it. And we started developing digital systems. And the computer technology that the NASA put in as seed money to start to develop this thing, of course, spilled over into the private sector. And what we see today, of course, everybody is influenced by computers. Whether we like it or not, you could be on a farmer someplace way out in the boondocks, and some computers got you, and you're working with a computer someplace along the line. That computer technology and its rapid advancement was largely due to the seed money that NASA had put into the things.
And satellites and communication.
Oh, well, yes. Everybody sees the Weather Channel. I mean, there's satellites, Weather Channel, communication satellites now. I still fly airplanes. We have GPS, global positioning system satellites, 24 of them up there that tells me, within, a couple hundred feet of where I am, flying an airplane. And for the farmer or for the geologist, it can get down to centimeters of accuracy.
And what about the health area? We surely have gotten some applications there.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things they had to do for astronauts was to monitor them. You remember I took off all that stuff? And so the monitoring systems we now have to record people's heart rates for a while and things like this, all monitored in hospitals. A lot of that was all spilled over from the monitoring systems that we had to develop for astronauts in the early days.
Let's bring it right up to date. We're in the Pritzker Military Library. What relationship does or should a space program have? What does our space program have in relationship with our national security needs within the context of the war on terror?
Well, when we first started out, of course, President Eisenhower said that we wanted to make this a civilian project.
Right.
But the development of all the technologies that we come out that apply to civilian flights also apply to military flights. A lot of the technology that you're now seeing in our present conflict, I'll give you an example. The UAVs that are flying now, the unmanned things, they control them from Nevada. Some guy in Nevada is flying this thing over Afghanistan and doing all this work. A lot of that technology, the communications especially, the satellite technology that we can utilize. Satellites are seeing everything these days. All this stuff was actually co-developed, civilian, and of course spilled over not just to the private sector, as in computers, but also to the military sector.
I've been reading the mission statements of NASA and the administration. I'm still a bit confused because you still have a great kind of tone that talks about peaceful uses and international cooperation and all of that. Then you'll come down and you'll see scattered throughout the mission statement paragraphs that say, but don't mess with our airspace. Don't mess with things that we need, like our satellites for intelligence gathering, et cetera, or you'll get in trouble. I mean, do we have a reconciliation problem there?
Well, there is a dividing line, of course, but the technology is what I'm saying. It spills over back and forth. You can't, the GPS system that is taking commercial airliners or taking my airplane and making sure that I get to the right spot. That's that same satellite system that might be controlling an F-16 off of an aircraft carrier. And so we mix the same technologies together, even though we try to keep our peaceful missions peaceful and the military to...
But do you see the day when countries will come on who will want to make an offensive military base out of space?
I think so, and it's been looked at pretty carefully. For instance, let me give you an example. If we put up a satellite system that has on it weapons that we can fire down when it kind of gets over, those systems are getting to be so easy to track these days that anti-ballistic systems to knock these down could be developed very quickly. And using the moon for a military purpose, I don't see where it ever come to pass.
Let me just review three of the points of President Bush's a renewed spirit of discovery program on space. Complete assembly of the International Space Station. Retire space shuttle flights by 2010. Fly crew exploration vehicle no later than 2014. Have astronauts return to the moon by the end of the next decade, followed by human missions to Mars and beyond. Does this sound about right to you? Are we biting off the right chunk?
Well, when I heard him say that, you could say things like that. It's really, do we have the money, the time, and the effort to accomplish what he wants to do? It's a bold statement. I think our present administrator is doing the best he can to honor that statement. I think we are finally getting out of this sort of lethargic period where everybody was too afraid to put up the next flight. I have to tell you that space is dangerous.
Is that right?
It's
I'm
risky
shocked
business.
that you might say that, Mr. Lovell.
There's a certain amount of risk in it.
Captain Lovell.
There's a certain amount of risk, walking across the street.
Yes.
And so as we live every day, we face risk. And so those of us who like what we're doing, we accept the risk for the rewards. And I think that's the way we should look at the space program. This is not probably the end of the accidents in our space program as we continue on. As much as we try to be, 100% right and have zero problems with anything, we're going to have some, failures. We're going to have things like that.
But if another administration came in and said, with all due respect and many deep thanks to you, for those of you who were on the manned experiments, we will now focus on unmanned experiments. What would you say to that president?
I'd say that's very nice because some of the unmanned experiments have done tremendously well. Remember the Hubble telescope? Yeah. Of course, that's unmanned, but we put it up there with man on the shuttle. But look at our rovers that are still bringing back information from Mars. Over a year after they landed, they should have been, had quit a long time ago. But there's a mixture. There's a mixture of unmanned and manned programs. We haven't built a computer yet that can think as well as our brain, or be built as cheaply as our brain. So we still have to have, I think, men involved in the space program. And if you ask me today, John, the president said we're going to go to Mars, and I think we are. I don't know if we're going to go in the time frame that he thinks we are. And you're going to say, well, Jim, why are we going to go to Mars?
Yeah. Why are we?
Yeah, why are we going to go to Mars? And I have to say, quite frankly, I don't know. I mean, I know that Mars is there, and we're here. The technology to get there is already in hand. The only thing we don't know is how, for that length of time, what the radiation situation will be with humans, that we someday are going to go to Mars. Now, we can be behind and let someone else go to Mars, or we can all work together.
We can all work together to go to Mars,
as a consortium of countries to go to Mars, which, as I mentioned earlier, brings all these countries together to work on a common goal.
But it may mean that in the congressional and political support, it may mean that an answer other than I don't know will have to be developed incrementally over these many years. Is that fair to say?
I would say so, and I think that some of the things that the intangible benefits about having a large body of various countries and people working together, they'll see the importance of doing that of a Martian trip.
Captain Lovell, how is it different now in terms of the training and the people selected for the NASA programs and when you were in it?
Well, when we came in, we were all test pilots. We all flew airplanes. We all had that mental capability, I guess, or that type of personality that lives on the edge. That's what test pilots normally have. We're faced with problems all the time. Today, it's a little bit different. Today, on a shuttle crew, there might be only two people that really control and operate or fly, if you want to say, the orbiter. That's the commander and the pilot. Everybody else has different disciplines. They could be astronomers, there could be geologists, there could be biologists, there could be engineers of some sort. There could be people who specialize in going outside to repair, like the Hubble telescope again, or other satellites, or recover satellites. So the training is a little bit different. I have to admit, though, that I'd hate to compete with the people that they're now picking for astronauts.
Why?
Because all of them at least have their master's degrees. Many of them have their doctorate degrees. And, you know, from an intelligence point of view, I think I'd be kind of way down the pike here trying to catch up with these people.
But you had such deep experience as a test pilot in other aspects of your life.
That's right, and that's when it was needed, when we were doing research and development for Gemini and Apollo.
A couple of quick ones, and then we'll go to our audience. You said in your book, Lost Moon, that the question most frequently asked was, did you folks up there in this perilous mission have poison pills?
No, that was often said that if something happened, that there was no way to get back home again, that we had a poison pill that you could swallow. No, because if we saw there was no escape or the end was near, especially on Apollo, there was a crank. And all you had to do was turn the crank, which would open up a little vent that would quickly, vent out all of the atmosphere of the spacecraft, and it would be over with in just seconds or minutes.
The other question a lot of people ask over the years, and if they'll go to the Adler Planetarium Jim Lovell exhibit, they'll actually see a part of the answer to this themselves with their own eyes. But people always ask, how do they go to the bathroom?
That's right. In the Adler Planetarium, if you look closely, there is the device that we used on Gemini and Apollo of how to go to the bathroom. And I'll tell you what, I'm not going to mention it because I want you all to go there to see it. The folks at the Adler will point it out to you, but that's how we did it at that time. And I tell you, the standard answer I always give is very carefully.
Very carefully. You had said in communication with the Pritzker Library before that you wanted to comment briefly just on why are you associated with the Adler Planetarium exhibits?
Thank you, John. I think it's a good question, and I'm very happy to be associated with the Adler because, and I donated all the artifacts that I had that they want to display to the Adler because it's now becoming a real premier science center. It was, basically on astronomy, but now they're looking at space science from the ground all the way to the farthest stars. And it's an educational center. And I hope that my little influence, if it helps at all, will sort of influence young people coming through to really feel like I did when my uncle came by and talked about airplanes. And here they see the Gemini 12 spacecraft. Here they see some of the things I had as a youngster when I was just thinking about going into
little things
space.
You wrote, or your U.S. Naval Academy paper.
Yes, and then when I wrote to the president of the American Rocket Society, the secretary, I said, how can I be a rocket scientist and things like that, and they're all there. So if they can, kind of view those things and in their own minds, say, this little kid did it, lived in a one-room apartment and got through this whole thing. Maybe I'd be interested in something like this too.
Then on November 11th, there's a new wing opening of that.
The second phase is the Apollo phase. The first phase is the Gemini phase. Second phase on November 11th, big opening for the public to come down there and see what we've done. I hope we've all done a good job, and I hope they appreciate it.
Do you ever cringe when people say, well, it's not rocket science?
Yeah.
Because for you, it was rocket science, wasn't it?
Yeah, or either that or being a brain surgeon, I know.
Let's go back to Brian Yanis and some questions. We got one. We got two down here. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Captain Lovell, my name is Jean Marie Cap, and I was interested to hear your story about how you got into your interest in rockets very early on, because it seems to parallel Homer Hickam's story. His story was told in the movie October Sky, and I'm just wondering, number one, if you knew him or know him, and secondly, how do you see children being attracted to the sciences today? Because from what I see, not a lot of kids are interested in math and science.
Well, I do know Homer Hickam, who wrote the story. It came out in the movie called October Sky, I think it was. And it sort of parallels what I did 10 years earlier, only he did it more exactly 10 years later. He had more help than I had at that particular time. And that's the kind of, things that maybe he got the influence. He eventually became an engineer for NASA, I think. He worked for NASA. And so maybe he got that idea way in the early days like I did, reading about rockets and Robert Goddard and Wernher von Braun, and finally did the same thing. I find that young people, as they go through, are very much interested. I've talked to a lot of grade school children and high school kids. And it's kind of interesting, when the movie came out 10 years ago, Apollo 13, the people who were not born when all that went on, when the Apollo went on, when Gemini went on, suddenly went to the movie. And they got re-educated in what was going on. And it became a new surge for people talking to me about, and getting to talk to people about what was it all like. So hopefully we can keep this going. And that's the one reason why I'm so happy with the Adler, because the Adler is going to hopefully do something like the movie did. Yeah. People will go through and see what was done in the past and say, oh, yeah, something about Apollo. Let me learn more about that.
When I walked out of there, the first thing I thought was, I got to get my grandson down here.
There you go.
We had questions here on the front row. Yes.
Jim, I was a navigator on a B-24 in World War II. When we flew as a navigator, we flew bombing missions and often the lead plane, as you know, right? Most of the navigators flew off the lead plane. Is this what's happening? Same thing, I keep thinking, are the fellows down in command control running the operation? When we used a bombardier, when we come to the target, it was called what? Agalier. All he did was, he didn't fly, he didn't use the bomb strike. The lead plane used the bomb strike.
I think I know what you wanted. I think the question was, when he was a navigator in World War II in B-24s, but the lead plane was the lead navigator, and the other planes merely followed the lead plane to wherever they were going. And then, and is it the same way in NASA? Is mission control really the lead navigator, and is the spacecraft merely following directions? Yes and no. The Mission Control Center, of course, is tracking all the time. And on the way to the moon, they could tell where we are and what were happening. But we had to make the maneuvers And we had on board the ability to do our own navigation, much like shipboard navigation, only it was three-dimensional. And one other thing we had to do, we had what was called, we didn't have GPS in those days. In fact, I don't think GPS would work out there. But we did have gyroscopic navigation. Where we had a guidance system that was could tell us where we are, how close we're going to get to the moon, how to maneuver from one position to another position using less fuel than we could do manually. So we also had that. So although the ground looked at our overall track and gave us instructions of how to maneuver to make that move, we had to do that ourselves. And on the way home on 13, because we didn't have the guidance system, we didn't have the computer, we had to rely on our own navigation using a system which we had developed when I was on Apollo 8 on an emergency procedure that was used. Fortunately, fortunately, I was on Apollo 8 to remember what that procedure was.
And I think we have time. We have time for one more question, Ryan.
Yes, Captain Lovell. I was wondering, how did you and Bill Anders feel when you discovered that Deke Slayton had offered to Frank Borman the opportunity to be the prime crew for Apollo 11 with your Apollo 8 crew and refused it?
Well, he brings up an interesting subject. It was true, not too well known, that after Apollo 8, since we had navigated, and it was almost a perfect flight, that because we were very pressed for time, remember President Kennedy had said, we want to land a man on the moon and get him back before 1970. Well, Apollo 8 was, the end of 1968. There was one more year, and then we had Apollo 9 and Apollo 10 to go. And so Apollo 11 was to be the first lunar landing, and they did offer it to us because the NASA folks wanted to make sure to make a lunar landing, and they wanted some crew that had done the job before, at least to get there, not on the lunar module to come back again. Borman didn't want to do it. He had been there. His wife sort of talked him out of it, and so Bill and I were very much disappointed. Everybody else would be, shoot us if we accepted, because they all wanted to be the first. So we were disappointed, but then we recycled back for Apollo 14, and then when Alan Shepard needed more time to train, we got 13.
Okay. On that note, we would like to thank our guest, Captain James Lovell, for joining us tonight. And I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us here at the Pritzker Military Library in downtown Chicago, and everyone else watching the broadcast. Now, stay with us on our website as we'll continue the question and answer portion of this program in just a moment. If you would like to be part of that discussion or to view this or any of our other programs in their entirety, visit us at pritzkermilitarylibrary.org. For the library's founder, James Pritzker, Executive Director Ryan Yantis, Producer Elizabeth Richter, I'm John Callaway. Thank you and good night. Okay, now we just... Welcome back for the rest of Front and Center here at the Pritzker Military Library. We will now be taking more questions from our studio audience and those of you who are joining us on the World Wide Web at pritzkermilitarylibrary.org. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, someone has to ask the question, so I will. If given the opportunity, would you go back and why? If you could go right now.
If given the opportunity, would I go back into space? I would go back into space if I felt that my presence there would be constructive to the overall mission. I always tell the story that when John Glenn, who was 77, was preparing for this flight, I went down to NASA and said I'd be more than happy to be his backup. And they told me I was too young. So, but there's so many qualified young people now in the program, and I kind of feel sorry for them because the missions aren't that close anymore, and you have to wait. Some people wait years to make a flight. and so that I would be very hesitant to step in to take somebody's spot.
But do you support the notion of private entrepreneurial space tourism?
Naturally, yes, I do. I support the fact that space tourism could happen. I think it's a matter of cost. Now, there are attempts to do that right now, you know.
Right.
Richard Branson is trying to enlarge Burt Rutan's Eagle and to try to make that a profitable enterprise. I think that what the Russians are doing now, if you have $20 million, you could probably get on one of those Soyuzes and go up in the International Space Station on their side of the space station for a while. But
I mean, you support that notion?
Yeah, I think that we are an entrepreneurial country, and I think that very strongly if we can find a way of doing it. But all entrepreneurs have to look at seeing if it's profitable to do that, and
then consider the whole public relations risk.
The risk to it, and the fact that there are lots of people who I think that would love to go and are willing to pay a lot of money for just that suborbital thing that Richard Branson is trying to do.
Yeah. Yes. Ryan, wait a minute. Does Ryan have a question? Okay.
You talked about your uncle and as a mentor and other individuals when you were in college, as well as your mom. How has your own children felt in mentoring? Have they followed a path in engineering, the military, or even some other field that's related to the space program?
I have 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. They're all adults now, of course. I think that my 2 sons were too close to the space program to really enhance it or to be admired by. My one son is an executive chef. He owns a restaurant up here in Lake Forest, Illinois. My other son is in the pharmaceutical business in Houston. And so I tried to see if they would be interested in going to the Naval Academy, and I didn't get many positive vibes for that. I have 11 grandchildren. And my youngest grandchild, who's only 5 right now, has my same name, by the way. I'm aiming him for the Naval Academy, whether his father likes it or not.
By the way, we have from the World Wide Web a question that's a little bit related to this. Hi, Jim. In all of your experiences with Boy Scouts and becoming an Eagle Scout, which ones applied the most to preparing you for your years in the space program, and how would you encourage today's young people, whether or not they are Scouts?
Very good question. It's the one thing that I didn't mention in our first segment. I was a Boy Scout. In fact, that's how I got to know about astronomy and things. I became an Eagle Scout. I can't emphasize too much how important that was to me to work through the scouting program, because as I mentioned that my father died when I was 40 and he was separated, so I really didn't see him so much. I was with my mother. That scouting became a surrogate father for me, and all the way through scouting, Scoutmasters helped me as I got my merit badges, as I went from first class to star to life to finally to Eagle. Very, very important, and it was really one of the contributions to my success in the space program was the fact of being an Eagle Scout. And I eventually became the chairman of the National Eagle Scout Association years after I had left scouting, just to give back to what they had given me.
Another question from the web. If Sputnik was a great catalyst towards boosting education in science, how does it make you feel to have so many people repudiate science, such as evolution today? Is it a danger to our future?
Well, I have to give you a personal opinion on that. Of course, seeing what I've known and looking back at the Earth, and in my experience, we are in an evolutionary period. We always have been. My views, and I'll just mention them for what it's worth, when you look at the controversy now between intelligent design and evolution, the intelligent design occurred about 15 billion years ago at the Big Bang. Before that, as far as we know now, there wasn't matter, there wasn't energy, there wasn't time. When the Big Bang occurred, energy, matter, and time started. Time is the evolutionary aspect. And through a series of laws, physics and chemistry, and some we still haven't gathered yet, time started the evolutionary process to where we are right now. So I believe that there really isn't any difference between what people call intelligent design and evolution, because it all began at the Big Bang, and now we have an evolutionary process. And as you know, that I think very strongly that there's always a beginning and an end. There's a beginning and an end regardless of what it is, and that's the way I feel.
When you were up there on Apollo 13 and things weren't looking good, did you carry with you a religious faith?
Oh, I did. But I did not become any more religious 240,000 miles from Earth as I am right now. I mean, God is with us here as he is 240,000 miles out. So there wasn't any born again religious activity as far as I was concerned. Now, I'm speaking for myself because of all the astronauts we've had, various people have had different...
No, I didn't mean that it would be a born again or, you know, a last minute conversion. But did you carry a certain faith with you in your life? And do you?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Captain Lovell, Fred Weber. Good to see you again,
Fred,
sir.
Nice to see you.
Speaking of evolution in the beginning of time, being out in space all that time, do you think that there's life outside of our solar system?
Good question. I definitely do. I think that looking at our own galaxy, the Milky Way, with millions of stars in our own galaxy, and now we're finding more and more large bodies around stars that we didn't know about before, that someplace in some of these stars there has to be solar systems, and some of those bodies around the stars have to be in a position and over a period of time to foster life as we know it here. Not just rudimentary life, intelligent life. The problem is that the nearest star that I know of is a star called Alpha Centauri. It's a little bit more than 4 light years away. That means that if I instantaneously started going towards that star at the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second, it would take me 4 years to get there. Now, according to Einstein, as you approach the speed of light, and I'm not an expert on his theories, but as you approach the speed of light, your time slows down, your mass increases, and so that if I could get to Alpha Centauri and come back again in a period of 8 years, the Earth would have aged hundreds of years. When I got back, no one would have known that I'd gone in the first place. So, you know, so until we can figure out some warp speed that is now in science fiction, I'm afraid we're confined to our solar system.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Julie Mueller, and I just want to know, I heard a lot of studies that were happening with Pluto. Do you still believe that Pluto is a star or a planet? And that what about the new planet that just found out about them?
What was that again, John?
I'm not sure about the second part. Do you still believe Pluto's a planet was the first part?
Oh, well, I have to go with the astronomers and the people that make those decisions. I guess that Pluto has been downgraded to a near planet of some sort. But we still have 8 planets. I have to learn like everybody else does now.
I want to say that the book Lost Moon, which was published years ago, is one of the finest pieces of work I've ever seen of nonfiction. And I'd be going through it, and I'm rooting for you, and I'm impressed by this story and that story. And then on Apollo 13, they would come back to Maryland. They would come back to Houston, Texas. And I have to tell you, I would tear up because of everything that she was going through and the courage that she displayed under just the most unspeakable conditions. Could you speak about your wife, how you met her and what you think of her?
She was really, the earthbound astronaut that was with me all the time. She, of course, is a Navy wife. And Navy wives, as we know today, with a lot of the military people overseas, have to take care of the family when their husbands are gone. I think one of the shining moments of her was the time when NASA called her up. We're in deep trouble, and suddenly NASA said the TV people wanted to put a TV stand on the lawn and get cameras all squared away.
On your lawn?
On my lawn, and she said, you know, something to the effect, you know, they weren't interested in doing that before the accident. Why were they interested in doing it now? You know, you can talk to my husband, he'll be back on Friday.
Good for her. No, that was a great moment.
Yeah, that was a great moment. Yeah.
But I mean, she had to deal with communicating with your kids during this period, and deal with the press, as you say, and deal with all of the other people coming in. I mean, I just don't think we appreciate sometimes the work that the spouses do.
Little Susan was very worried. She was, I forget how old, 8 or something like that. And, you know, my mother or my wife tried to console her. He'll be back. He'll be okay. But, you know, her thoughts are this way, you know, and I mentioned it in the book that at that time the Vietnam War was going on. There were a lot of naval aviators flying off of aircraft carriers. Here I was. I had a whole fleet waiting to pick me up someplace in the ocean. There was a mission control center that was helping me get back home. And here these guys are out there, and the wires back home of those people flying, they didn't have all that. And they were wondering, so my wife was thinking, I'm not too sure really where I wanted my husband to be, either out into space or out to sea in the West Pacific.
But when Houston, we got a problem hit, she turned on Jules Bergman, who was a respected science and astronaut reporter. And he said early on in this broadcast, they have a 10% chance of coming back.
Yeah.
And she sees that. And then she has to deal with that.
Takes a brave woman.
A couple quick questions. First of all, you were expecting to land, I believe the pronunciation is a Frau Moro, sort of area on the moon. Did any subsequent Apollo missions get to land there? And secondly, could you explain a little bit more about the gyroscopic guidance systems that allowed you to hit that 2-degree reentry window into the Earth's atmosphere and how exactly that worked? I mean, briefly, of course, but thank you.
Yes, the question was, first of all, Apollo 13 was designated to go to a place called Frau Maro, the hills of the Highlands, because we thought the material might be different, and we knew there was an ejected line on the surface thrown up by volcanism or by impact. We didn't get to go, but Al Shepard, who I traded flights with, he originally had Apollo 13, but they decided to give him more training time. And so they slipped me to Apollo 13, and I was supposed to have 14. Well, Apollo 14 did land at Frau Maro and was very successful in landing at Frau Maro. The second question was the ability to come back in. Coming back from the moon, you're going at what we call a super circular speed. We're doing about 25,000 miles an hour coming back in. The speed varies all the way. For an example, when we start going out to the moon, we start out at 25,000 miles an hour, but we're coasting. The moon is pulling us back all the time, so we're slowing down all the way to the moon until we get to what we call the sphere of influence, where the moon's gravity now is stronger for that body than the Earth's gravity. And therefore, as we slip through the sphere of influence, we start to speed up towards the moon until we get near the moon at about 6,000 miles an hour. So now on Apollo 13, we came back. We did orbit the moon, of course. We didn't want to slow down. And the moon's gravity finally pulled us around and aimed us back towards the Earth again. And then we started out at about 6,000 miles an hour, but the moon is now pulling us back. When we crossed the sphere of influence, we're only doing about 2, and then we started to speed up. It's like falling down a long tunnel. And we started to speed up faster and faster and faster. Now, because we're going such a high speed, we couldn't just go into the Earth's atmosphere in any direction. we had to hit inside a 2-degree pie-shaped wedge with respect to the atmosphere of the Earth. If this is a small, flat segment of the atmosphere, we had to hit inside a 2-degree pie-shaped wedge. That wedge couldn't be any less than 5 degrees or any greater than 7 degrees. If we came in too shallow, we'd skip out, like skipping a stone on water, and because of our high rate of speed, we'd have gone in an orbit about the sun. If we came in too steep, the sun deceleration hitting the atmosphere would make us a fiery meteor over the sky for a few brief seconds, and that would be it. So we had to thread our way into that 2-degree pie-shaped wedge. And that's why when you asked that question, well, we didn't have the ground to really control us. We had to use our own navigation using the Earth and the Earth's terminator and a little gun sight that we had in the window of the lunar module to make the corrections to get back into that corridor to come back in for a safe landing.
But didn't you have visibility problems also in terms of the result of the oxygen tank exploding? Wasn't there debris?
Yes, there was a lot of debris. Now, we have a guidance system that we could take sightings on in the lunar module like we had on the command module. And we were able to transfer our guidance over to the other computer and to the guidance system. But we could not update that guidance system because when the explosion occurred, we had thousands of pieces of mylar, this gold-covered like cellophane that was used for heat protection on all the interior of our service module where the explosion occurred. They were all out, and the sun was reflecting on them, even though the sky is a velvet black, but the sun was reflecting, and they all looked like stars. So we couldn't tell a real star from a fake one. And therefore, we couldn't take we couldn't take sightings on the stars because we didn't know which one to look at, and we couldn't tell the constellations at all.
Yes.
You spoke earlier about the space program and how the risks in the space program have changed over time. How initially there's a little bit more risk, now maybe a little less willingness to take risk. And as you take less risk, you have less return, it seems, in terms of the scientific results and the other results. If you had the ability to establish the goals for the space program looking forward, what would your goals be for the space program as you look forward over the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I think I would try to follow President Bush's, declaration that he did, I think, in 2003. I think what we have to do, we have to finish the International Space Station, get it up. I think that Michael Griffin, who's the present administrator, is now getting the shuttle to fly more. I think that we've been overly conservative in, trying to make the launch dates, and, we've bent over backwards the other way. I think we need to furbish the Hubble telescope one more time. It's running out of fuel. It's probably been the most significant unmanned contribution or triumph for the space program was that Hubble telescope. And then I would start getting the crew excursion vehicle going, a vehicle that's not only going to be able to maintain and keep the International Space Station going, but also be expanded to go back to the moon and use you go back to the moon and start more exploration. The scientists, by the way, were very disappointed when we cut the program of Apollo to only up to 17. There were originally 20 flights. The number 20 was already going to be utilized for the Skylab program, so that was bad. And then we were going to use 18 and 19, and when 17 had the accident, or 13 had the accident, we had already paid money up through 17, and we lost face if we didn't keep going through 17. But they canceled 18 and 19.
What did you think of the movie Apollo 13?
Well, John, you're talking to somebody who's prejudiced.
No, but I mean, what did you think?
We liked it. We liked it very much. I thought that Ron Howard followed the book. There was some artistic license taken into it, but all the facts were true. The only thing that he saw some good subplots was the fact that Ken Manley, well, first of all, Jack Swikert, who hadn't trained for 2 months, that was an actually true story. We hogged the computers and the simulators for the last couple of months, and Actually, the backup crew gets the visitors going and makes sure the hotel rooms are there and all that kind of stuff. And suddenly, just 4 days before he's going to go on, and the movie looks like he has to earn his wings every day. Well, Jack was a very competent pilot. We had all the faith in the world in him, and so that was no problem. But Ron Howard saw kind of a thing like, is he going to make it or not? And the other little bit of artistic license was Ken Mattingly, who was supposed to get the measles, and he was dropped. And then the movie shows him being the sole person inside the simulator trying to figure out how to get the power back into the command module. He was part of a team doing that, but he wasn't the only guy. And so, but here was a thing where poor Mattingly is dropped because we think he's going to get the measles, and now he's the one significant getting the spacecraft back. That was a little bit of artistic license.
But basically, thumbs up.
Thumbs up. And, oh, yes, very much so. And Mattingly never got the measles, by the way.
That's right. That's right. Just another follow-up question. Because sometimes these aren't answered within a year or 2 years or 5 years. Do you take NASA-sponsored or NASA-monitored physical examinations on a regular basis to see if there are longitudinal health issues having been in space as much as you were?
Many of us do. Many of us go back every year, we get a free physical and they get all the information.
Yeah.
There is a group that is studying what effects people who are in space have in later life. And so far, we haven't found much difference. Of course,
nothing on bone density or anything like that?
Well, no. I haven't been up there long enough. These people who have been up 6 months and a year, that's when they're really studying those people to see if there was a theory that without zero gravity, the body would not absorb the calcium to keep the bone strong because there's no reason to have a very strong skeletal system. And therefore, the bones have become weak because they're not operating against a gravitational field. I tried, that was one of the experiments on Gemini 7, but 2 weeks wasn't long enough to do it. But there have been definite results of loss of bone density.
On the mental side, do you dream of any of your space adventures? Anything come back?
No, I look back at them fondly. I don't dream about it. I don't have nightmares about it because once I'm firmly back on terra firma, I feel that I'm here, and that was, it's like the old naval aviator who lands on an aircraft carrier. If he can walk away from it, it's a good landing.
But in space, up there in Apollo 13, particularly at the end, it was cold up there and hard to sleep, right?
Yes, it was. We were losing more heat out into space than we were gathering from the sun because the normal way we get heat for a spacecraft is to use the excess heat from electronic systems. But they were all shut off, so we didn't get that. And so it got down to about 34 degrees Fahrenheit by the time we landed on the Earth.
Wow. Yes?
Even though you've been long retired from the Navy, I understand that you're still quite the explorer, specifically when you went to Antarctica with Jim Pritzker and Paul Superior and a host of other people. Could you comment on how your experience as an astronaut and a space explorer actually worked with your Antarctic exploration?
Well, I think that both going to, I went to the North Pole in '87 and then with Jim Pritzker in 2000. I think it's the type of mentality, the type of people who do this kind of thing. Being a test pilot, looking at testing airplanes and not knowing exactly what's going to happen, then getting into the space program and having that. And those are the things that people who like to explore want to do. And all that helped me with those trips to the Antarctic and to the North Pole.
Yes.
Last question. My name is Susan Aaron, and I am curious about the Mercury flights. I think that there were a number of chimpanzees that may have participated in the early tests, and I wonder if were records kept in terms of their health and well-being after those missions, and was there evidence of particular needs that humans would require for later missions?
And for those who don't know, could you distinguish the Mercury program, say, from Gemini?
Yeah, it's a good question. And let me just mention the Mercury program. This is, of course, our first attempt to go into space. The Mercury capsule was one man. And when I was not selected for the space program the first time around, the other 7 people were, and you probably know them, John Glenn, Al Shepard, Gus Grissom, Scott Carpenter, Wally Schirra, Deke Slayton.
1961-ish, right?
No, 1959.
But I mean, was the first successful flight in 61?
The first successful flight was Al Shepard on a little Redstone rocket, 15-minute suborbital flight. And then the first manned flight, John Glenn off an Atlas in February of 62, I believe it was, just 3 times around the Earth, I think it was, 3 times around. But before we did that, we were very cautious people, and we sent chimpanzees up Ham, and I'm trying to think of the other one.
Abel and Baker? And
Abel and Baker.
Sam, did you say?
No, was it Ham?
Oh, Pam.
Ham. And before we sent Al Shepard up, we sent up a chimpanzee to do essentially the same things. They had it arranged to whereby if he did the right technique, he would get a banana pellet. This is true stories. And if he didn't, he would get a shock, you know. And I have to tell you quite honestly, the booster actually put the monkey, whether it was Ham or the other one, into a higher orbit faster than Al Shepard went. And the controls that he was supposed to follow were miswired, and every time he did the right thing, he got a shock. And he came down. He was one mad chimpanzee, but they retired him at that time. And the same way for John Glenn. When John went up, the first thing they put another monkey into orbit, you know, to see if he could do it. He came down in really fine shape. So the story goes that, you know, we are going to put the monkey and Al Shepard up at the same time. And Al's job was merely to feed the monkey the banana pellets. The monkey was going to do all the work.
We're just about out of time. We thank you very much for giving us so many insights and stories. Is there anything that you've already said that you want to reemphasize? Is there anything that you want to make sure as we leave here this evening that we leave thinking about?
Well, I would like to say 2 things. Of course, I think our space program has a lot of benefits to everybody, and I hope that the population of this country knows that what those benefits are and how we're going to come to it. And also, I'm very much of an advocate of trying to get young people interested in education, in science. Of course, that was my field, and so I hope that the little bit that we're doing here in Chicago and that I'm working with the Adler, I hope that it catches and that the people start to utilize that facility and get a sense of education. A lot of young people will then follow careers from their initial exposure to what we have at the Adler.
And I guarantee if you get to the Adler Planetarium and see the Lovell exhibits, you will get an education. And this has been an education for us this evening. That will do it for us tonight. Thank you all for joining us. For all of the staff at the Pritzker Military Library, I'm John Callaway, and thank you and good night. Sir. Wonderful. Thank you, sir.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are not necessarily those of the library. This program was made possible by our sponsors, 2006-2007 season sponsors, McCormick Tribune Foundation, Turtle Wax, Karen L. Pritzker and Michael K. Vlach, Robert and Myrie Pritzker, Albert and Audrey Ratner. And our program sponsors, Chicago Sun-Times, IBS Futures, David Truitt. To learn more, visit our website at www.pritzkermilitarylibrary.org. This has been a production of the Pritzker Military Library.